recording this now. There we go. And Michele, you're here somewhere, right? Wait, there you are. Hi. I will unmute you and speaker view. Okay. How are you doing, Michele?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for coming and talking.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for inviting me. Where's the tiger suit?
Oh my God, I forgot to put on my tiger suit. I'm sorry.
Oh gosh.
I know, that was the whole, you were like, what about your tiger suit?
I'm not doing it unless you wear a tiger suit.
Yeah. Just wait. Mauricio Gonzalez Carreño, this Chilean winemaker who I went and visited last year and stuff, he just sent me this, or actually his wife just sent me this picture on Instagram of him like in his winery, like shirtless with their little, like, I don't know how old he is, like 2-year-old son or something. And they actually got a tiger suit for their son. And they were like, look, we got our son a tiger suit because of you. Anyway. So I got to get some pictures with them, but okay. So, I guess we'll start with, let's introduce you, Michele. So Michele, are you from New Jersey originally?
No, I'm from New York.
From New York. Okay. So you're from New York and you were studying chemistry? I
was studying chemistry, as an undergrad. Okay. And then after that, I did my enology degree in California.
Okay. Yeah. You like got sucked into winemaking and then went and did your enology degree in California, and you went and did what you were doing, like an internship in Bordeaux?
Kind of, yeah. I just went over there really quickly to do a very quick seasonal stage, really just to have it on my resume. Like, okay, I did it and I worked in Bordeaux, fancy, check. And then, that was it.
And then you got stuck there.
I totally got sucked in, yeah.
Did you, how did you meet, how do I pronounce his name? Stefan?
Stefan. So he's a consultant and he helps all properties all over the place in Bordeaux and all over the place. Kind of transition from conventional farming with like used to pesticides and all that stuff to organic. Or biodynamic, or in the minimum sustainable. And so one of the property where I went to work was under his direction. And I then got kind of invited to work with their team and stay on to stage with them. And then I came back to the States and I was here for a while. And then I went back to Bordeaux when a job opened up.
Okay. How do I pronounce his last name? Derenoncourt?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Stefan Derenoncourt. And as I was like researching for this class and everything, like I was reading like Oz Clarke's book and stuff like that, and like just for everybody else out there watching and stuff, like Stefan Derenoncourt is actually a really famous consultant, like winemaker in Bordeaux. I mean, he's famous enough that there are like large sections in books about Bordeaux on him. Like there was more information about Stefan Derenoncourt than there was about man, I've forgotten his name. There we go. That's it. I've forgotten his name. Stefan Derenoncourt is more important than the guy who makes Chateau de Valandreau and the Garagista movement. So there you go. Anyway, but so, and how many wineries do you work with? You work with other wineries, I know, outside of Bordeaux, but like how many Bordeaux properties do you work with now?
About a dozen. So I work at one as the winemaker, and then I have a couple of other little projects that I make for myself, my own sort of label. And then I guess I'm not doing the importing anymore, but I was when I got started. I put together a portfolio, a little collection of right bank producers that either were one of my teachers or just a neighbor that didn't have US representation. So, and then it kind of grew and evolved from there, but it was, it's about 12 properties. And Fougère is one of them. Pierre Anglair is my own thing, but the Chateau de Fougère is one of the ones in the book.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. I'll launch into the handout and like background on Bordeaux, but absolutely like, please cut me off and interject and stuff like that.
No, I like what you said. It's totally
but right, I know, but absolutely like add anything you think needs to be added, please do.
Okay, good.
it was cool, like reading about Bordeaux, and like, and as I started thinking about Bordeaux in preparation for doing this seminar or lecture or whatever, Bordeaux's basically the most famous wine region in the world. You know, like people that don't know anything about wine, they recognize Bordeaux. Like they know that Bordeaux is fancy. They have an association. Like Bordeaux has this connotation, this like popular culture connotation. The only other region I think that's kind of like that or type of wine is Champagne, but Champagne is a different animal, you know, because of what it is and stuff like that, and the prices. Bordeaux is, I would argue, the most famous wine region in the world. And I think it is a good exercise to like step back and sort of self-critically ask yourself, like when you hear the word Bordeaux or when you think Bordeaux, like what do all of you individually think of? You know, like what kind of wine or what kind of person in your mind drinks Bordeaux? I think a lot of people probably imagine like people on Wall Street, like in like suits, like out at like the steakhouse having meetings, drinking Bordeaux and stuff, which, okay, all right. I mean, some of those people do drink Bordeaux, but also, you know, like Bordeaux is this huge region that produces all kinds of different wines, and Bordeaux produces a lot of affordable like table wines and stuff too. So it's complicated. It is, I mean, and as I was thinking about it, I was like, man, how much Bordeaux do I drink? Like, I don't actually drink a lot of Bordeaux. Personally, I like Bordeaux, but I don't actually drink a lot of it. And I was like, man, I actually drink more like Chilean Pais than I drink Bordeaux, which I drink a lot of Chilean Pais because it's my job to like look for unusual, new, exciting things. But still, I think that's like also sort of indicative, like, you know, all of you ask yourselves, like, how much Bordeaux do you drink? Bordeaux is this very important wine region, but you know, how much of it, like us as wine professionals, how much do we interact with it? And some of that I feel like is like me or us like overlooking it. So Bordeaux is this huge region. It's 247,000 acres of vineyards on the Atlantic coast of France. It's just south of where like Cognac and stuff comes from, right down there by Gascony. It's an estuary on the North Atlantic. So the North Atlantic provides this like cooling, moderating influence. It's relatively wet. There's a fair amount of rain. So like mildew and rot are often a problem in a lot of parts of Bordeaux. It's different from a lot of other wine regions in that, like, as I put in here, like when you're talking about like Burgundy or Châteauneuf-du-Pape or like the Moselle in Germany, like a lot of them are very old regions that were created because it was a great place to grow vines and grapes and make wine, or like because there was like a large church presence, like monastery or monasteries, and there were monks there for generations, like cultivating vineyards and making wine. Bordeaux was always one of the predominant or preeminent ports, French ports on the Atlantic there. So Bordeaux was this like prosperous trading town that started out originally as like a hub for shipping, because it's on these two rivers. The Garonne and the Dordogne flow together here and then flow into the Gironde estuary right there. And then there's other rivers that flow into them, like the Lot River that flows through Cahors. So it was very easy to like move agricultural produce and like manufactured goods, whatever, to like move them from interior Southwest France down to Bordeaux, to the port of Bordeaux. And Bordeaux, because of the estuary, has this great like large natural protected harbor. Put them on ships and then sail, you know, up to England or the Low Countries or whatever. So Bordeaux was this trading port. And do I have the year here? When was it that Bordeaux and England. Okay, so 1152, Eleanor of Aquitaine marries Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy, and then Henry Plantagenet becomes Henry II, inherits the throne of England. And so southwestern, like Bordeaux and southwestern France, Aquitaine, are basically, it becomes an English possession. It's part of England. And so the entire nobility in England, all of the Norman nobility there, starts getting all of their wine from Bordeaux. And or you know, they start importing French goods from Bordeaux and wine from here. And very quickly the merchants in Bordeaux go from being like, all right, we'll buy wine from Cahors and Bergerac and inland, to being like, wait, why don't we just grow more grapes here and make wine and like make more money ourselves and take over this market. Because Bordeaux has always been, you know, this like mercantile, sort of like hard-nosed, like money-making city. So they start planting more and more vineyards. And originally, actually, this is just to me interesting, where the city of Bordeaux is, I'll go to screen share later, but where the city of Bordeaux is, that's basically where the Graves area is. And Graves means gravel in French. That was where most of the vineyards were, because a lot of the rest of Bordeaux was actually a swamp where you couldn't grow anything because it was a swamp. So they were growing grapes there, but over the years, the city expanded and basically absorbed all of those vineyards. And now it's all like subdivisions and stuff like that. And so what was Bordeaux back in like the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, now that's mostly like city and industrial area and stuff like that. And a lot of the grape growing is in other parts of Bordeaux that used to be a swamp. Anyway, but so that like kicked off that supercharged wine production in Bordeaux, but it has always been about meeting market demand and exporting wine. And somewhere in here I put like, is that actually different from other wine regions? Because pretty much any famous international wine region at this point, they're not making wine just for themselves. They're making wine for export. They're making wine for, you know, like the commercial market around the rest of the world. So Bordeaux isn't that different now today, but it does have this very different historical background that I think has shaped the culture, the winemaking there. A lot of originally Bordeaux, like Bordeaux in England, it was called claret. I still love calling it claret because it's funny, I think. But you have left bank and right bank. Left bank is predominantly more Cabernet Sauvignon. Right bank is more Merlot. There's more gravel. This is very broad statements here. More gravel on the left bank, more clay, limestone subsoil on the right bank. The right bank didn't used to get a ton of respect like 100, 200 years ago in England and the English-speaking world. But part of that is just because the wines produced originally in like Saint-Emilion and Pomerol and stuff, the city there, Libourne, the merchants there were more focused on exporting their wines to like the Dutch, the Netherlands, the Low Countries and stuff, and not focused on the English market, where the city of Bordeaux, which is closer to the left bank and like Medoc and Saint-Julien, Saint-Estèphe, Margaux, like they were focused on the English speaking market. And so we in the Anglophone world, over the centuries, our idea of Bordeaux was partially shaped just by economics and the fact that like the merchants that were focused on England were in that part of Bordeaux, and then there's this whole other part of Bordeaux, and the merchants there were just, they weren't focused on America, on England and America. They were focused on the Netherlands and Denmark and stuff up there. This is kind of an aside, but I don't know. It's Bordeaux because there has always been this market pressure to meet demand in other countries to export, and you know, all the merchants there were buying wine from other places, blending it, shipping it, and trying to create a brand for themselves, for their own merchant houses, sort of like, sort of like port houses were, and to an extent still do today. There was a lot of pressure on them to like compete with each other, compete with wines from other places, and to justify higher and higher prices for Bordeaux, for their wines. And I'm talking about like hundreds of years ago. But that pressure did help develop Bordeaux, and it helped develop the whole culture of wine marketing and wine consumption that like we have today, that extends around the entire world. Like the idea of a single producer, a single vineyard producing their own wine, bottling it themselves, shipping it abroad, and us buying wine from a particular vineyard that started in Bordeaux. The first written reference to like a wine from an individual chateau, or from an individual producer in the English language is from Samuel Pepys from 1663. He wrote in his diary. And Samuel Pepys, I absolutely recommend, if you don't know Samuel Pepys, go look him up, read about him on Wikipedia, or read some more about him. I'll explain why in a second, but he wrote in his diary, 10th of April, 1663. He wrote about going back and forth to work. And then he went to the Royal Oak Tavern with several people from work, and they drank a sort of French wine called Ho Brian, that hath a good and most particular taste that I never met with. And it was noteworthy. It was so noteworthy that he wrote it down. And he also, I think he had like sworn off wine, but then not drinking wine had made him feel ill. And so he had to go and drink more French wine for his health. But that is the first like English language reference to wine coming from any individual producer, like from any individual estate. And it is Chateau Haut-Brion from Graves. So that's 1663. And Haut-Brion was so famous even back then that it was being exported under its own name to England, which to me is just crazy. Samuel Pepys, he was an administrator of the Navy in the British Navy in the 1600s. He actually was very important in modernizing the British Navy. He kept a diary for about 10 years. And it's clear from reading his diary that he didn't intend for it to become public while he was alive, but he did intend for it to become public and be read by other people after his death. And so when he passed away, like in his estate, there was like an index of his diary and stuff like that. It is incredibly honest, and like he just wrote about everything that he did. He wrote about his bladder stones. He wrote about like all the stupid things that he did. He was extremely well educated. He was a huge lover of like the arts and music and theater, and so he wrote about like going to all of these plays, all of this contemporary stuff that was happening in England. And because he was also on the board of the Admiralty and writing about the Navy, he wrote about like the Anglo-Dutch War. He wrote about like living through the Great Fire of London. And he also had insane extramarital affairs, and he wrote in great detail about all of them as well. And it just blows my mind to read what he's just very matter of fact about the like affairs and orgies that he had and stuff. And it's crazy. It's just a very, very different cultural time. So anyway, moving on, O'Brien. Part of why I think Bordeaux has become so famous, if you compare Bordeaux to other wine regions, where was my example here? The estates in Bordeaux, the famous estates are larger. Okay, so Chateau Margaux, for example. Chateau Margaux has 650 acres, which is a lot of land. 210 acres of that are like within the Margaux AOC and make like Margaux wine. So you compare that, like think of, I personally, for my, thinking of other wine regions and other wineries and vineyards that I work with, thinking of like some of the grower producer champagne houses that I work with, some of the like famous like Grand Cru Burgundies out there, like Batard, Creole Batard Montrachet and things like the production. A lot of those are much, much smaller. Most of the wineries that I work with are really small. I mean, I don't work with any big famous like classified Bordeaux growths. But the fact that some of these extremely famous Bordeaux estates, like the first growths, I mean, a lot of them that they have hundreds of acres, and they make, many tens of thousands of bottles, tens of thousands of cases of wine a year. That just means that there is more available. And so, yes, they are very expensive, but more people can actually consume it and interact with it. Where like, if you're talking about a Grand Cru Burgundy that they only made like 300 cases of or something like that, it's how many people can experience it and have an amazing experience with it and talk to their friends about this incredible thing and like show off and post on Instagram. Like, that's very limiting. Bordeaux is kind of unique in that some of these extremely high-end estates are relatively large and produce a lot of wine. And that, from a market economics sort of standpoint, like that allows more people to experience it and, and like recognize that it's famous. I touched on right bank, left bank. I'm just going to really quickly hit a couple of like definitions that you should know if you are talking about Bordeaux or interacting with people about Bordeaux. Right bank, left bank, the Gironde, the Garonne and Dordogne and the Gironde flow together, and then they flow sort of like northwest out to the Atlantic. And anytime you're talking about the river, anytime you are talking about a river, you talk about it in relation to the direction of its flow. So right bank, left bank. Left bank over here on the ocean is more gravel, more Cabernet Sauvignon dominated classically. Right bank over here, where you have Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, Côte de Castillon, Blay, Bourg, that is more clay over limestone dominated, and that is more Merlot. The left bank, that's where the Medoc is. And you have the Medoc, you have the Haute Medoc, which is down at the southern edge of the area. And I should go to screen share and get my Bordeaux map here. Where is it? Here we go. All right. So over here, this is the Medoc up here, Haute Medoc down there, city of Bordeaux right here, and then you have Graves, Pessac-Léognan. So all of this up here, this peninsula, was swamp up through the 1700s, I want to say, somewhere on here, 17th century. Yeah, I think late 1600s. The merchants of Bordeaux, so city of Bordeaux here, Bordeaux was becoming more and more prosperous, shipping all kinds of stuff, not just wine, but, they were making more money, more successful merchants. And if you're a successful merchant, you need an estate, you need a chateau, a big house to show off. You're running out of room here. So what do? You start looking at all of this land up here that is mostly swamp. They had Dutch engineers come down from the Low Countries, and they had tons and tons of experience with drainage and moving water, because large portions of the Netherlands are slightly below sea level. So these engineers came down and they dug drainage channels all back and forth, crisscrossing the Medoc, and drained out a lot of the swamp in here. So you had like, I want to say, I remember the highest point over here in the Medoc is 140 feet above sea level. That is the highest like hilltop over here. So a lot of it is pretty low. But there are banks of gravel deposited from the river, and gravel soaks up energy from the sun during the day. It has, it retains thermal energy. It heats up and reflects that energy back at the vines. and Cabernet Sauvignon that is a late ripening grape. Like Cabernet Sauvignon needs that in order to ripen in Bordeaux. It had that in Graves, but more and more of the area in Graves got taken over by the city of Bordeaux. And so once they had engineers come in, drain the Medoc, quickly people from Bordeaux, there was like a land rush. People started building fancy houses and estates up there. And what do you need with your fancy house? You need a vineyard. Started planting vineyards, and pretty quickly the Medoc was all vineyards, and winemaking sort of moved from Graves up there into the Medoc. Super quick, back to screen share over here. Then this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the right bank. We will talk about Blay up here, Côte de Bourg right there, Côte de Castillon right over in here, and then Saint-Emilion and Pomerol a little bit later as we move through the wines. But so this up here, this is the right bank. This is where it's more clay over limestone. Clay is cold. Clay is a heat sink. So over there on the right bank, it's just generally the soil is too cold to really fully properly ripen Cabernet Sauvignon. But early ripening grapes like Merlot and Cabernet Franc, the places where, particularly where the clay topsoil is more shallow, below that there is limestone, the vines can get their roots down into the limestone. That cools them down. It acts as a heat sink for the vines, slows down the ripening process, maintains acidity, and so you can make these really expressive, lovely, lush, ripe, but still like with like fresh acidity Merlot and Cabernet Franc wines from over there. And so that's sort of like the two classic halves of Bordeaux, left bank and right bank. Classification of 1855. It's pretty or what I wrote on here is pretty explanatory. There was this Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1855, and so Bordeaux was going to send all these wines to this exposition, and the organizers of the exposition were like, hey, come on, can you make this a little bit more user friendly? Give us some kind of, like, what are all these wines? How do you organize them? And so the merchants of Bordeaux classified all of these different chateaus in Bordeaux, in the Medoc, basically based on what prices they were selling for. And it was really just intended for this one time, this like exposition in Paris. But it just sort of like entered into everybody's minds, and everybody was like, this is it, the 1855 classification. This is how we decide the quality and price of wine estates in Bordeaux. And it's almost never changed. So since it was created in 1855, in 1856, they added Chateau Cantemerle as a fifth growth. It is thought, it's conjecture, and maybe people have forgotten, but they think that Cantemerle was supposed to originally have been included, and they just, originally when they printed the list, they just forgot and they left it out. And then they were like, we left out Cantemerle. That was supposed to be there as a fifth growth. And so they added it. Since then, nothing changed. They didn't demote or promote any of them, ranking from fifth growth to first growth until 1973, when Chateau Mouton Rothschild was promoted from being a second growth to being a first growth, which is the fact that nothing has changed in all of that time. And then Baron Philippe de Rothschild managed to I think he started trying to advocate for this back in when he took over the winery in the 20s. So it took him like 50 years, but he managed to convince everybody that he had to convince, the French government, the government in Bordeaux, other winemakers, other estates, merchants, managed to convince all of them to promote his estate from being a second growth to a first growth is insane. And I can't even imagine all of the parties and bribes, and I don't even know what that he had to do and pull off in order to do that, because the difference between being a second growth and a first growth is millions of dollars per year, basically. I mean, it's incredible. So anyway, then I have different subzones in Bordeaux: Medoc, Haut-Medoc, Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Margaux, Graves. Those are all over on the left bank. And then right bank, Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. Côte de Blay, Côte de Castillon, Côte de Bourg, Bordeaux Supérieur. Bordeaux Supérieur is not a region. All of those other places are regions, and we'll talk about them a little bit as we taste wines. Bordeaux Supérieur is it's an AOC that takes into account a lot of like pieces of vineyard that don't fit into those other appellations. So there's different pockets of Bordeaux Supérieur, like around Bordeaux, but it has higher quality requirements than just AOC or AOP Bordeaux. Yields have to be lower, the vines have to be older, the wines have to be aged for longer. They have to be aged for a minimum of 12 months in barrel before you can legally qualify for Bordeaux Supérieur classification. So, all right, with that, I think we should start drinking wine. And the first wine that we have to drink is the Pierre Anglair, made by Michele. And this is Entrée du Mer, which I didn't even talk about, but Entrée du Mer is another like large, important part of Bordeaux. Take it away, Michele. You're muted.
Am I there?
Now you're there. Yeah.
So Entrée du Mer, it means between two seas, and it's that big, vast area right between those two rivers. You've got the right bank, the left bank, and then everything in the middle is Entrée du Mer. And Entrée du Mer is, I mean, it can produce gorgeous, beautiful wines, and then it's also like it can be complete, total wasteland. It's enormous. So this little wine, I'm the winemaker at this one property where I make a project called Pentimento, and I've been making that since 2008. And about, I guess, 5 or 6 years into that job, all we produced at this property is red fruit, so Merlot, Cab Franc, and we're making only red wine. And it just kind of started to get on my nerves a little bit that there was nothing really to drink after work. There was no shift drink. And just, I'd been working in the hospitality business for years before that, all through college and everything, and UC Davis as a bartender. And I think at any job, there's always some kind of shift drink. Even if you work in a bank, you go out for a drink after work. And there was just nothing to drink while we were cleaning up, which takes hours. And especially something cold and refreshing during harvest, you're miserable and you're hot and you're mad at everybody all the time. And I just kind of, rather than trying to run to the store before it closed to buy wine to drink after work or during work, that was cold and refreshing, I just decided just to sort of make my own and have a little tank off in the corner, just so that we could have sort of almost like the equivalent of just beer on tap to drink after or during. And so it was really just, it was meant to be a shift drink. And the word Pierre Anglair means cornerstone in French. And I started doing this little project. It was just for us. And then my importer excuse me, he said, "Can you make more of this?" And I can, because I could at the time, because we weren't growing that fruit on the property. I was sourcing the fruit from a neighbor who was also under the direction of Stéphane Dernicourt. So again, organic fruit, all that stuff. So it was easy enough to get fruit and make a bigger quantity. So the name Pierre Anglair kind of just came to be just because I think it was more of a joke. It was a little bit of a dig on me that, cornerstone, your foundation, in order, Michele only comes to work if she knows she's got half a tank of white wine to drink while she's cleaning the hoses and stuff. So I didn't know what to call it. And in the beginning, it was just Sauvignon Blanc. I just wanted a cold glass of white wine and, to just take the edge off after work. And then, it kind of evolved into this other thing, and there's Semillon in the blend now, but that's all it was supposed to be. And so it's kind of like the little entry level, and it's just that little wine that you want to kind of sip on during the day, and you don't have to worry about how, the other thing too, we cook so much with wine over there. I mean, everything is, you deglaze everything with, you're always, making whatever and pouring half of it into the, whatever you're making, risotto or whatnot. And it's sort of like that kind of wine that you just, it's not meant to be this big sort of, cerebral thing. You just want a glass of wine after work. And so it just became Pierre Anglair. So that's that.
I think it's also like white wine is actually really important in Bordeaux. Bordeaux actually produces a lot of white wine, and there's a lot of parts of Bordeaux that are like not hot enough or don't have the right soil, or that aren't great for making like what we think of as classic, serious red Bordeaux. So there's a lot of white wine that gets produced. There's a lot of white wine that gets drunk in Bordeaux because it's a, you know, the like hot, sunny seaside. But it sort of gets overlooked. And so I felt like it was important to include like this or something like this, but also it's like a good example that like of the 6 wines here, only one of them is white. And probably we should have more white wines here in the tasting because Bordeaux makes a lot of great white wine, but it gets overlooked and we only have this here in the tasting. But it's a great example of like of what Entre Deux Mers does. And it, like this isn't serious. This isn't like uptight, like, you know, serious, you know, demanding wine. This is just really, really fun, fresh, crisp, juicy, refreshing white wine. That's Bordeaux is really good at doing this. It's like zippy and grassy and lemony and like a little citrusy and crunchy. It's really cool. Michele, do you have like, I'm just curious, do you have a handle on like, is there just a lot more wine produced on the right bank now than the left bank? Like when you're talking about like Medoc, because Medoc isn't.
Oh my God, Medoc is huge.
It's huge, but like, but then compared to like everything else over there, like Saint-Emilion and its satellites and Pomerol and Côte de Castillon and stuff like that, it seems like.
Well, I mean, the right bank is a lot smaller, and you've got Saint-Emilion right in the center, like it's sort of like the downtown of the whole thing, and then all those little AOCs out in the periphery that are producing. But it's the left bank is enormous, and Entre Deux Mers is enormous. But I think that the right bank is just it's much smaller, it's more condensed, and it's they're all kind of clustered around each other. But not a lot of white wine grown on the right bank. It's all, you know, mostly Entre Deux Mers. They grow it on the left, of course, but they don't really grow a ton of it over there on the right. Okay. So. Okay. And the last thing you want to drink in the cellar when it's hot is red wine, and that's all we have.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are we going to do?
Probably, yeah, and probably the red wine that you have that's there, that's available for drinking, is probably mostly like young, aggressive, tannic.
That, or it's really expensive and it's been in the cellar for 1,000 years and you're not allowed to touch it, and it's all, you know, so it's one or the other. And so, you know, you have to either run to the store really fast before it closes, or, you know, you've got to run over to your neighbor's house and, you know, beg for something, you know, refreshing to drink.
Yeah.
For aperitif.
How much time do you have, Michele? Like, because I could skip ahead to the Chateau Fougère.
No, I'm here.
Okay. All right. All right. So then the second wine that I've got, this is Chateau Mulan de Lagne, Saint-Emilion. It's AOC. It's not Grand Cru. This is 2005. It's just been here I held on to a bunch of it in my warehouse for a while, I don't know, I think I bought this like 12 years ago or something like that. And it's, because 2005 was a pretty good vintage, but like, it's not even Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, it's just Saint-Emilion like AOC. It's younger vines. It wasn't aged for as long in barrel. So it probably shouldn't be that age worthy, but I figured why not? I would hold on to it. And then we were doing the seminar and I figured, oh, this is a good time to pull this out and see how it's doing. I am really curious, since I guess I've sent bottles to a couple of you, and then I opened 3 different bottles and poured samples from, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's like some bottle variation between them. But for me, smelling it right now, it actually smells pretty lovely. It smells like there's a little bit of like leather. There's a bunch of herbs, like sort of rosemary-ish. And the fruit is kind of like really pretty, like lighter cherry, raspberry. It's getting a little bit, I don't know if this is on the camera, if this works, but it's getting a little bit like bricky, sort of like browny, bricky around the edges, but it's still totally alive. So this was, relatively speaking, like inexpensive Saint-Emilion. This is a little, it's a, like, they have like 7 hectares. They converted to organics in 2001. This is about 70% Merlot, and then with some Cabernet Franc, and I think a touch of Cabernet Sauvignon in it. It's 15 years old, and this is still, at least this bottle was really pretty and still really alive. It's got some of that like classic like cedar cigar box kind of like thing to the aroma. Maybe it's a little bit light, but it's but still really good. Michele, I do actually, so just yesterday my shipment from Village showed up, and so I got more of the 2016 Pentimento in. And I actually have an open bottle here. I actually ran out of the fourth wine that I was using for the seminar. So most people have this Montagne de Saint-Emilion as wine number 4, but I and a few of other people have do have Pentimento. So we'll get into talking.
Oh, okay, great, okay.
Michele, how much do you feel like like I read in reading and researching for this, I read a ton about like on the right bank, it was basically, I read a ton about clay and limestone and like how deep is the topsoil and the hills in Saint-Emilion, like the Saint-Emilion like coats and stuff like that. How important do you think that is, or how true is that? Like
it is, it's a lot, it's really important. So in Saint-Emilion, the top of the plateau there, I mean, they maybe have like 10 centimeters of topsoil and then limestone. And then once you get down into the other places, and like the slopes are always different. But then there's usually, you know, sometimes it's up to a meter of clay, and then you get down into the limestone. So I mean, it varies all over the right bank, but it's all over the place.
Okay. And it does make a huge difference depending on how much topsoil you have. Like the less topsoil, the more complex, more like aromatic.
I think so. And so it's kind of, it's also, well, it's the flavor of what you end up getting, but it's also like the work that you can do in the vineyard. A lot of the guys, like one of the guys I work with, he is on total, like just solid limestone, and he can't use any equipment in his vineyard. It was actually a really good thing because he breaks everything. So like all of his cover crops have to be these really crafty, different types of wheat that he can use that kind of go down and they burrow down and they break up the limestone for the root systems for, you know, on either side. And so it's kind of, I mean, it's definitely different for the water holding capacity. It's different for all the nutrient uptake. It's different for the level, you know, the pH, and also like the structure of the vine. So, I mean, if you have young vines and they haven't gone all the way down yet into the limestone, it's a structural thing, but it's also a chemical thing with the calcium that's in the limestone. And it's also just, it varies with the work that you can do.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess that's what I just kept reading. And that all of these, through like Saint-Emilion and all the Saint-Emilion satellites and Pomerol, and then over into like Côte de Castillon and stuff, that it's like, there are places where it's like just flat, like clay. And then there's this ridge of limestone and this plateau of limestone that runs through, and sort of like wherever that is, and the limestone is slightly different in different places, but wherever that is, like that completely changes the winemaking and like what you can do.
Changes the winemaking, changes the vineyard management, changes the flavor of the wine, changes, really, it's like the same thing with like when it's just clay. I mean, that clay is like, it just never dries out. When it does, it kind of does that shrink swell thing. So the vines can kind of go a little bit deeper, and then you get that struggling thing. So it's very site specific. It's like, I don't know, every chateau is totally different. Every property is a little bit different. It's all clay and limestone, but different amounts. And there's always a lot of pride in whatever the thing is that they have, because it's like, this is what I have. And, you know,
yeah. Yep. So this is the third wine. This is Chateau Beauséjour in Puisquin, Saint-Emilion. So this is like the far eastern edge, like eastern satellite of Saint-Emilion. This is small old winery. It's the Dupuis family. They bought the estate back in, I want to say it was like 1927. And it's the grandson, I think now, of the original owner, grandson or maybe great grandson. But they're interesting because they never adopted modern agriculture. The son who originally sort of took over farming it, who came home after World War II and took over running the vineyard and the winery, he learned farming and winemaking from his grandfather, who also had a vineyard that also now is a part of the family, that is, I want to say, in like Montagne de Saint-Emilion. But like that's where he learned about winemaking and farming, and they've just kept going with that. And so they got certified organic from EcoCert very, very early on, and they've never used any pesticides or herbicides or anything like that in the vineyards. They've always worked organically. And this is interesting because it's 100% Cabernet Franc, with 0 sulfur added. This is Sans Souf Cabernet Franc, not aged in barrel at all. This was done completely in stainless steel, and it's 2018. So it's younger than pretty much all these other wines that we're tasting today. It's definitely, like, smelling it, it's more like musky and like animal-y. It's almost like, smells almost like animal, like fur or something. It's kind of gamey. Also like blackberry, like black cherry. It's almost like cherry cola-y kind of like smelling. Like a little bit of like really, really dry, bitter sort of baking chocolate. Some of the freshness must come from just not being in wood at all, just always having been in stainless steel and being younger. Wow. It's more juicy, but I also get way more tannin on the palate. Like compared to that 2005 Saint Emilion, like this is obviously young and like pretty tannic in comparison. That's the first taste though. I always, the first taste is always, like my palate has to get used to it. Okay. All right, so now wine number 4. All right, wine number 4 is the one where I started out with this, the La Petite Tour in Montagne Saint-Emilion. And actually, I should hop over here to, where is that? Let's go. Montagne Saint-Emilion. There's the winemaker, Maurice Gonzague. He bought this winery, and he has a couple of, I think he bought this, it's like 5 properties that were all connected. He has another one in like Lalande de Pomerol and Canon Fronsac, but he farms organically. It's mostly Merlot. Temperature controlled tank fermentation, and aged in a combination of tank and 1 to 2 year old barrels. So most people have that, but then I had pulled aside 2 bottles to use for this seminar, but then so many people were interested in the seminar that I needed more than 2 bottles. But unbeknownst to me, overnight, we sold all the rest of it that we had, and I sold out of it. And so I was like, oh, well, what am I going to do? Oh, and then the Pentimento came in and arrived yesterday. So I was like, oh, great. Now this is an opportunity for me to use Pentimento. So I actually don't even have any of the Montagne de Saint-Emilion to taste and say, and like talk about what I think it smells or tastes like. But this is a great opportunity for us to talk about the Côte de Castillon and how sort of like important that is. Because like Bordeaux has this aura of being like really I don't know, like set in its ways, very like tradition bound and stuff like that. And Bordeaux encourages that because that's part of like that's part of how Bordeaux sells itself. This, hundreds and hundreds of years of tradition, but there has actually been a lot of change in Bordeaux over the past like 50-ish years. There have been a bunch of different like famous enologists that have helped revolutionize and improve winemaking in Bordeaux. And currently one of the big things, as far as I can tell, and I'm going to now defer to Michele, but one of the big things that is changing in Bordeaux is that people didn't used to take Côte de Blay, Côte de Bourg, and Côte de Castillon really seriously. They were just looked at as like places to make cheap, like affordable table wine and stuff like that, or like bulk wine. A lot of the production here in these areas were dominated by local co-ops, and the co-ops often sort of defaulted to a prioritizing quantity over quality. So they were paying farmers, just like a price per kilo. And so it was in farmers' interest to produce more kilos per hectare to make more money. But as people, like what we were talking about, that limestone ridge, that limestone like plateau goes down through Blay and Bourg and through Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, and then cuts out over to the east through the Côte de Castillon here. And so in a lot of places, there are a lot of points in Côte de Castillon, Bourg, and Blay where you have basically the exact same soil conditions that you have in parts of Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. And people have started in the past like 15 years being like, wait a minute, if I want to buy more vineyards or I want to start a new winery, should I pay, I don't know what Grand Cru Saint-Emilion is worth, what, like $300,000 per hectare? Something like that?
Yeah.
Should I pay $300,000 per hectare in like Saint-Emilion, or should I pay I don't know, like $60,000 per hectare in Côte de Castillon, or $100,000? And so there's been more money and development, and people. The reason that Côte de Castillon and Bourg and Blay weren't making exciting wines is probably more because people weren't trying to make exciting wines there. And now there are people coming in and being like, you know what, I'm going to harvest later. I'm going to limit my yields. Like, I'm going to age my wine longer. I'm going to try to make really serious wines over here in Côte de Castillon. And so Michele, Pentimento, this is the first vintage that you made here in Côte de Castillon?
Yes. So the first 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So the first 8 or so vintages were at a property in Montagne Saint-Emilion. And then in 2016, I moved the project over to this property in Castillon. It was definitely, I like both regions. I love all the satellites, but I just needed to change the property. Was more of a quality issue.
Remember, this is being recorded. So whatever you say about individual properties.
Right. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to say that it was in my best interest, and Stefan and everybody else, I was advised it's probably a good idea to transition to another property where the opportunity for growth is better. The property is itself beautiful, soil profile, everything, and the quality was, right up there. And everything about it, really great family. The whole thing was, a much better scenario for Pentimento. So yeah, 16 was the first vintage that we made over there. I didn't make 17. There was too much frost. I don't know if you remember that, but everybody got wiped out in 17 from the frost. But yep, so this is was my first year over there.
Does it feel, is there like a difference between like Montagne de Saint-Emilion and Côte de Castillon that you can generalize? Like, do things feel different?
I think so. I mean, Castillon's much bigger, and you get over there and I wouldn't say that it's the Wild West, but it's beautiful. It's a lot more trees, a lot more hills, a lot of like sort of those ups and downs and nooks and crannies and all that stuff. And it's just I feel like it's up in the hills a little bit, and it's a little bit hidden. It's off the beaten path. I mean, for me, I was really drawn to it just because you are off the beaten path. Like when you mentioned Bly, when you sent me your notes, I thought that I love Bly. No one's ever heard of it. It's way up north. It's absolutely beautiful. And I feel like I tend to drink more wine from places like that because they're not as these big, powerful, like monsters. The wines are a little bit more elegant. But you're really hard pressed to find, I think, a wine from Bly, you just don't see them all over the place. And I think that, you mentioned, you're really not hearing about these little satellite places, but the satellites, they definitely have to follow a certain set of rules. They're not as strict as they are in Saint-Emilion, because Saint-Emilion is the only classified AOC, but all these little places that you see over there, they kind of can, they can be a little bit more, I feel like they are a little bit more experimental. I feel like the guys, Simon Blanchard, he's in Montagne, he's doing very Burgundian style wine. My other friend Christophe is doing no sulfur, wild yeast fermentation. Everybody's kind of doing this kind of their own thing. And I think that, I like all of the right bank. I just feel like some of the satellites are, you are coming across wines that are just a little bit more interesting, I think. Than just the regular kind of traditional sort of stodgy, what did you say, tweed? Did you say
tweed jackets? Yeah. I wear so many tweed jackets. That's like my de rigueur. Like I have all these old Harris tweed jackets that I wear, but when I'm not wearing my tiger stripe jumpsuits.
So it's a bigger property. It's really very well kept. The owners are in the vineyard every single day. I mean, it's just one of those places that it's family owned, it's family operated. We work together, and it's like they really take a lot of pride in like the day-to-day work. They are the epitome of growers and winemakers and family owned vineyard owners. It's not like just for them, it's not just a business. And I think a lot of Bordeaux is very much just a business. There are, these famous stories of the owners of the Chateau have never even met the people who actually work in the cellar, and they've been there 20 years, like stuff like that. You hear that a lot. Most of that's like left bank stuff, but that definitely goes on. And I think that I'm working with a really cool family now, and I'm really happy to have transitioned over to their property.
Cool. Yeah. I've said this before, but I will say it many, many times again. When you're making wine in a region where the land costs, 400,000 or 500,000 like euros per hectare or more than that, that's just very limiting. If I wanted to go and like buy Chateau Cantemerle, that fifth growth that got added to the 1855 classification, if I wanted to go over to the Medoc and buy that, I would have to, I don't know, I would have to like get a whole lot of investors and private equity money, like that would be millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to buy that property. And then I would have massive debt payments, and I would just have to make as much money as possible every year, and it would be brutal, and I would have no room to care about anything other than the business than making money, and I wouldn't be able to experiment or do anything at all. Whereas, somewhere like Côte de Castillon, Bourg, or Bly, if the land is so much less expensive, it just, you have more room to do other things, to not just care about the bottom line, to be like, okay, my mortgage payments are only this much. I just need to cover that. And then I can try experimenting. I can try a different blend. I can do something different in the winemaking process. And yeah. Yeah.
You know, all these places, they have the same soil profile. I mean, all the, you know, microclimates vary from here to here, whatever, but in general, same weather pattern, same soil, same grape varietals. They just don't have the pedigree, and that's all that's really missing. They don't have that classification, all that stuff. So it's like they're still producing really beautiful stuff. But you're right that it, you know, when you're making wine in one of those places that it's just business, it just kind of takes the fun out of it, and it's not as, you know, I don't know, it's not as exciting as a producer, I think, because I mean, you could be just making widgets at that point. You just need to make your money. You know?
Right. Yeah. All right. Moving on to. Don't know what I did with the cork for that. Wine number 5. The only left bank wine that I have here. Chateau de Fougères, Clos Montesquieu, La Raison, 2015. So this is a property you work with, Michele?
Yep.
Okay.
So this is the only left bank so far that I've added to the little lineup. I've always kind of just stuck to the right bank. I feel like when I got over to Bordeaux, I was, first of all, really, I didn't want to stay in Bordeaux, but when I got there, I ended up staying because of, you know, what I encountered with the people and everything. But I sort of had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about the left bank, just because it is the land of the first growth, the big chateau, the estates are enormous. I don't love Cabernet Sauvignon, and it was just kind of this combination of things that I didn't have any real interest in working with anybody on the left bank. This property is overseen by Stefan, so therefore it's organic and all that. And when I visited them, I tasted the wine and I saw their cellar and what they were doing and how they were making their wines. It's and even though it is 60-40, there's a lot of Merlot in the blend, which is unusual for the left bank, but they are really laying off the use of new oak. They're kind of doing very minimal intervention. And I love the wines, and I really like the people. And so when it came time to maybe expand the portfolio a little bit, I was in touch with them and I asked them if I could add them to our portfolio and be their exclusive importer for the US for the La Raison label that you have. And I think we started with the 2010, and okay. Yeah. I love this wine. Yeah.
I've got the screen share on here, and it's transitioning through different pictures. Somewhere there we go. See, there you go. That's the gravel that people talk about. And I think there's a couple more pictures where it's like it's very obvious looking at the vineyard here. Yeah, look at that soil. That is completely different from the right bank, from Saint-Emilion and Pomerol and Castillon and everything. Yeah. There we go. It's funny. It's like, I mean, I guess I hear about this from like other winemakers and other wine regions talking about like the difference between like gravel or sand or clay and like how they affect like the vines differently. And some regions are like absolutely trying to avoid clay or trying to avoid gravel like the plague, you know, like talking to people in like the southern Rhone, like the Rhone, where they're like, no, if I work, if like my vineyard that has gravel in it, you know, like I've recorded the temperatures, and the temperatures are just so hot during the day and during the night that it just cooks the grapes and like destroys them. So I try to find places with clay or with sand or something like that. And then over here in Bordeaux, it's like everybody is looking for gravel in order to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon, if that's what you want to do, if Cabernet Sauvignon is your thing. It is cool. It's good I'm really glad. I don't have access to a lot of left bank wines because left bank wines are generally, I mean, so many of them are very expensive, and they're also, I don't know, I feel like a lot of left bank producers, like they want to work with like Bordeaux merchants, like people that do a lot of specifically Bordeaux. And I like Bordeaux a lot. But most of the importers that I work with, like they are not classic Bordeaux people. And so I don't have access to a lot of left bank wines. Like I mostly have access to right bank wines, but it's cool. This is a very different wine, like just immediately right off the bat, smelling the aroma. It just smells more like Cabernet Sauvignon. It's that like black currant, little bit of like it smells a tiny like basil leaf or something. Like there's this like spicy little thing to the aroma, and there's a little bit more sort of like cigar box to it. And cigar box is one of those descriptors that like people in tweed jackets talk about and stuff with elbow patches on their tweed jackets. And so I always feel like weird. It's one of those descriptors that I would read in the Wine Spectator like 20 years ago when I was reading Wine Spectator. But when I got into wine, when I was a teenager, I worked in a wine shop that also sold tobacco and like had a like climate controlled tobacco room. And I would go and I would like package loose leaf pipe tobacco, and we sold cigars and stuff like that to people. So I'm actually intimately familiar with cigar boxes and what it smells and like what different types of tobacco smell like. So it's one of those things. I can't help it. It's stuck in my brain. And this has it. It has that, and it does also have like a little bit of like basil, like tomato leaf. And it also has more like weight and like depth on the palate. It's it's a little bit more like linear, more structured. There's more tannin than all the other Merlot based wines that we've had, and more acidity, it feels like it's more structured and linear, more serious in a way, but it's completely accessible. Like it's not like hard or like young or rough. It's really well balanced and integrated. Denser, darker fruit, more like blackberry. It's just a very, very different personality from all of the Merlots. It's just a slightly more, I mean, I wouldn't say, I shouldn't describe it as like standoffish, but it's just more like complex, a little bit more, I feel like you have to like work a little bit more for it. There's more depth, there's more happening underneath, more subtlety. I do like Cabernet Sauvignon based Bordeaux, I guess, is the thing. I do really like Cabernet Sauvignon based Bordeaux. I'm really glad I have access to that. Thanks, Michele.
You're welcome.
If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have any left bank Bordeaux in my portfolio. I'm going to actually, just before we jump into the sixth wine, I am going to hop on screen share here, and I'm going to go back over and look at Graves. Where's that map? Okay. So Bordeaux, Graves right down here. Here's Graves Superior, and Pessac-Léognan was originally part of Graves, and then they sort of formed their own. They broke off and formed their own AOC, much to the consternation of the rest of Graves down here. But so this is like, I don't know if this really, I mean, it is left bank. It's the left bank of this river, the Dordogne, Garonne, the Garonne River there. But it's not like, this is left bank proper up here, all of this Pauillac and the Medoc, Saint-Estèphe and everything. But this is that region that I was talking about. Like originally, this is actually where most of the grape growing in Bordeaux happened. And then the city here has expanded and taken up more and more land. So like Aubryon, that first growth that is super famous that Samuel Peeps mentioned in 1663, it's actually the only chateau that is not up here in the Medoc. It's the only chateau, non-Medoc chateau, that was included in the 1855 classification. Originally, where it was just vineyard land, but at this point now, so the city has expanded so much that Aubryon is like basically in the suburbs. Like you look at vineyards of Aubryon and a couple of the other wineries that still exist next door to it here, and there's like vineyard, and then right on the other side of the vineyard is like apartment buildings and stuff like
I know, it's right.
warehouses and things, and like they've only managed to hold on because Aubryon is so valuable and worth so much money that it's, you know, it wouldn't be worth it to build buildings there. So anyway, last wine I included. The last wine I included is actually, it's the least expensive of all these wines. It's Chateau Le Berger. It's not a second label. It's made by basically a winery called Chateau Lescart. And Chateau Lescart is actually right outside of Bordeaux. I think it's like right on the border of Graves, but doesn't fall within the Graves AOC or something like that. It's right there, Chateau Lescart. So you have Bordeaux is like right up here. So Chateau Lescart is right there, and their vineyards are right over down in here. And they make a bunch of Bordeaux Superior there, but then I think they have some vineyards that for some reason don't qualify as Bordeaux Superior, and that's what they make Chateau Le Berger from. This is primarily Merlot. I want to say this is like 85% Merlot. This is 2019, so this is the youngest wine that we're drinking today, and that's sort of why I put it at the end, because like the younger that a wine is, particularly when you're talking something like Bordeaux, you know, if it's younger, it usually has like more aggressive acidity and tannin and stuff like that. It's usually just like a little bit more angular and intense. And I didn't want to put this like before that 2005 Saint Emilion or something. This is made by this guy, Gerard Laurent, and I'm going to go back to screen share. He is a retired, where is he? Here we go, Chateau Lescart. He had a successful career. He had a company, he started a company, an engineering firm making high pressure valves for the petroleum industry. And it was successful, but then, you know, he got older, and so he sold his company, and then he decided, there he is, there's Gerard. He decided to buy a sort of rundown property in Bordeaux and start making wine as his like retirement, which went okay for the first 3 years, but then he sort of like got more and more interested in winemaking. And so after 3 years of having other people make his wine, he had worked with them and he learned more and more about winemaking, and he took over winemaking himself, and then sort of did a bunch of experiments and like made some wine conventionally, and then made other batches of wine with like wild yeast fermentation and stuff like that, and decided that he really personally felt like native yeast fermentation and organic farming just made better, more interesting wines. So he converted everything to organic farming and natural yeast fermentation. Some of the Chateau Lescart wines are fermented in concrete eggs. I'm pretty sure that Berger is just stainless steel. He grows a lot of Cabernet Franc. He grows a whole lot of Malbec too. Like he's just doing a lot of, he's an engineer and he is a tinkerer, and he just can't help like tinkering and engineering with whatever it is that he's doing. So that's what he does. So he makes a range of other wines. Chateau Le Berger, I think because it doesn't fall into the, because he can't sell it as anything other than just like AOC Bordeaux. I forget what I'm selling this for now wholesale, but this retails for like $13 or $14 a bottle. And he actually came and visited. It was something like 5 years ago, and he doesn't really speak any English. So it was really funny, like me and him and his wife trying to interact. He seemed like it was like my like grandmother and grandfather had become French and come over to visit from France and didn't speak any English. And it was like trying to talk to my like very proper traditional, like, you know, elderly grandparents. and I had just straight piped my Subaru WRX at the time and stuff. And so I like picked them up from the airport in this like terribly loud, ridiculous car. And we drove around and had a good time. But I got the impression, from what I could tell talking to him, he sort of was saying that he sells the Chateau Bergy, like at cost or like at a loss, that this is sort of like a project that like he personally just thinks that more people should drink Bordeaux and enjoy it. And so he makes this wine and he sells it for less money than he realistically should, just to try and get more people to drink Bordeaux. Because even he, as like, however, he's in his 60s, even he recognizes that Bordeaux has this image problem, or that like people see Bordeaux as this like fancy, fusty, you know, like drink for like old people sitting around in their libraries, you know, like looking at their butterfly collections or whatever. And he was like, Bordeaux makes such lovely wine. Like you can make great, lovely wine here in Bordeaux, and more young people should drink Bordeaux. So I make these wines, I make this wine, and I sell it for no money, just so that people can afford to drink it and enjoy it. That's what this is. It's like simple, straightforward stainless steel Merlot. It smells very juicy. But it's not jammy. It's like juicy, but also like a little bit spicy and like black peppery. More like dense black cherry, more acidity, more aggressive, like young tannins. It's a rougher, like, you know, like young, angular sort of red wine. But it's good and it's fun. I wanted to include this because it's a good example of like just young, like fun but sort of interesting Bordeaux. And also I think it's just good we've tasted a bunch of wines that are older compared to a lot of the wines, like a lot of the wines that we drink, a lot of the wines that people drink in America, wines are consumed very young. And, you know, here today we're drinking wines from, 2005, 2015, 2016. We're drinking wines that are older than the vast majority of wines that are consumed in America. I figured it would be good to drink a young Bordeaux and like see like this is more what Bordeaux is like when it's younger. It's absolutely got the structure to age it to like, for this is actually an age-worthy wine. Like this is absolutely going to be better like 3 years from now. None of it's probably going to hang around until then. Maybe I should go put some away, but anyway. I think that covers everything I had to say. Does anybody have any questions out there? This would be a great time for questions. Either unmute yourself or send me a message or anything like that. Michele, is there anything that you feel like I didn't really touch on? Are there any like holes or anything that you want to add to general like Bordeaux?
I don't think so. I think that I liked everything you said, but I definitely have to agree with this guy that Bordeaux definitely has an image problem, and that's the thing. And I feel like it has this sort of stodgy, old school kind of that you break out a bottle of Bordeaux to impress somebody at a dinner party or a birthday, but you don't really sit around and drink it at the wine bar with your friends because it's not sexy. Bordeaux is not sexy at all. It's not edgy. There's nothing cool about it, but and on top of it, the labels are so boring that it becomes this place that seems really intimidating. They don't write anything on the back labels. They just kind of like, we're Bordeaux and this is what we make. That's it. They're not high fashion. They're not cool. I mean, they are cool, but they're not, they don't have that sort of artsy edge. They're not, they don't, it doesn't seem like they're kind of doing all this youthful experimentation and all this stuff, but a lot of them are. And, there is that whole historical, daunting you know, traditional pedigree thing about Bordeaux, but a lot of Bordeaux is really not like that at all. And I think that people don't get to see that side. So I really love that guy said that it has an image problem. I could not agree with him more.
Which is funny because he is basically like a stodgy old man. Like he is an elderly, very proper, traditional, like French gentleman.
Yeah.
And even he recognizes it. Yeah. I just want to say that I have actually, when you say like Bordeaux is not sexy, like I get that you mean that like Bordeaux is not like exciting. Like people at the natural wine bar aren't like, oh my God, Bordeaux. Oh, like.
Right. Even though people make totally natural wines and all that stuff. Yeah.
I don't want to drink that Domaine Octavin. I don't want to drink that Mousse Moussette. I want that Bordeaux over there. Give me that Saint Julien. Like people don't say that. I just, but for my own personal experience, like I have had extremely sexy Bordeaux's. Like I've had bottles of Bordeaux, you know, that were like 20 years old that I drank them and I was like, oh my God, this wine is amazing and mind blowing and stuff like that. And it just, it's just like, that's part of like why I was excited to do this seminar, and I should going forward, like, you know, think about that more because Bordeaux, like that, it's just Bordeaux does make incredible wines, and like I want to, and I should, as a wine professional, share that with more people because these are such awesome wines.
Is that what Michele was trying to step away from with her labeling of the Pentimento, was to kind of break that mold of the boring label? And
yeah, kind of. So yes, for me, I felt like I'm average American consumer. All through my 20s and everything, I was buying wine at the under 20 table. At the store, I would never go into a Burgundy or Bordeaux section in the shops because all the labels looked exactly the same to me. It seemed really overwhelming and intimidating. You look at the back label, you have no idea if it's Merlot or Cabernet. You have no idea. It's like they almost expect you, well, we are Bordeaux. You should know that Saint Julien is Cabernet and over here in Fronsac is Merlot, whatever. We don't know that stuff. We're not from there. And I think that for me, the little image of the Chateau outline on the off-white label is just, they all look exactly the same. And I think that I wanted to first have my label look like nothing, like not like those other wines, but I kind of wanted to give a little bit of a nod to the soil profile, and that's what that chemical, the molecular formula is. And so, and my friend, you have the Simon Blanchard wine there. He was one of my teachers, and he kind of did the same thing. He's the one who's making that more Burgundian style of wine. It's like very parcel specific. He didn't want his label to look like that stodgy old thing because I think it's off-putting. I think people look at it and they just like run in the direction of something bright and much sexier looking in the store. You know what I mean? Like not so much maybe in the restaurants because you don't see the wine as much when you're sitting at the bar, but definitely in the store, those wines just kind of, I feel like they sit there and they collect dust, and it's like, well, that's why, that's the whole problem. It's like beige. Everything's beige. So,
right.
I changed my label a little bit.
Can I see the label close up?
And it's funny because when I started making it and I showed the guys where I started making Pentimento, they were like, oh, it's ugly, Michele, you're never going to sell any of it. They were so like, this is horrible. That's not Bordeaux. You don't sell Bordeaux in a package like that. And I was like, well, I'm not from here. I'm not from France. I'm not from Bordeaux. I'm American. I'm from upstate New York. And I don't know. It's very traditional to have a very traditional Bordeaux label. And I just thought that I should change it because I could, so I didn't want to go with that.
You made it sexy.
Well, I don't know if it's sexy, but it doesn't look like the other. It doesn't look like the other one, so it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, I personally think it's really fun. It's like it feels slightly like rebellious and fun to play with it because Bordeaux is so like traditional and proper and stodgy and everything, and so to like. But they do make there are really cool, exciting wines. And so to play with that and like, I don't know, subvert it is cool and exciting, makes it more accessible. I'm just curious about your take on like working in Bordeaux, like how does it feel, like the sort of general personality and character of Bordeaux compared to other places, since you work in like Costières de Nîmes and other places in France and in Europe, like how do you feel about Bordeaux?
How do I feel about it just in general, like
yeah, like how do you feel about it in general, or like how do you describe it compared to those other places, compared to like the Southern Rhone and stuff like that?
Well, I definitely think, for sure think that the style of winemaking, even though we tinker a little bit, not as an intervention and we add things or make any adjustments, but we now, a lot of us are doing organic and wild yeast and, no sulfur and that kind of thing. It's still very, very traditional, and it's very, it's in its ways. It's very, very old school. The cellars are all very old. And I think that, and this is, I know this is being recorded and I shouldn't say this out loud, but I think that, down in, I don't know if you've been to Pep and Patri's place in Monsant, but I work in their cellar too. And the food is so good. And the food is so good in Nîmes. And it's like there's the culture in Bordeaux is very respectable and very traditional. And I think that in other places, I don't want to say because it's being recorded, but it's like, it's just very different.
I'll say it.
There's a little bit more irreverent. I don't know. You say it. I don't want to say it.
I'll say it. Yeah. No, like food. I'm sure that like the food in Monsant and Costières de Nîmes and stuff is fun and like creative and in the moment and stuff like that. Like the food that people are making in their homes and stuff. And then you go to Bordeaux and it's like, if you want to have a nice meal, you've got to go to this like Michelin star restaurant, and you're going to get like these amazing snails on like a little tiny ceramic dish and stuff. And it's like, it is great. I'm sure that like it's great food, but it's precious and it's serious. And you have to be like, okay, I am having amazing food right now and stuff. Like Bordeaux, but this is also because Bordeaux is a tourist destination, because Bordeaux is Bordeaux, and people like go to this mecca of wine with the intention of spending a lot of money. And so there's restaurants and hotels that cater to that. And it's like,
oh yeah, they'll be like, come on in, spend your money.
It's precious. Yeah. It's very precious.
So yeah, there's that. But I love working in all the different places. But I stayed in Bordeaux. Bordeaux was I thought that I was only going there for a mark on my resume, and I was going to check it off my list, and then I ended up staying. So I was just as surprised as everybody else. But I like it that much that I've made my my business Bordeaux, and my projects, like my winemaking stuff, Bordeaux. So, which is really, really weird. It's almost like Bordeaux is the exact opposite of me and my personality and stuff that I drink and the people I hang out with and all that stuff. And you would think, but then when you get to Bordeaux, you realize that stuff is there too. And but I think that the image of Bordeaux, that's the regular people don't see that. They only see what's in the encyclopedias, because Bordeaux has so much history. It's this big boring thing that was written about in these gigantic 8,000 page really these encyclopedias, and like that kind of I don't know, it's very vague history, and it's really kind of boring, and that's all we have access to. But but there is another side of it that's fun.
Yeah, thank you. And that other side is really fun and exciting, and I'm excited to like do more and get more into that other side of Bordeaux. Yeah. All right. I think that's actually an awesome place to leave it, talking about that other side of Bordeaux. So cool. Thank you very much, Michele. Thanks so much for coming and talking about what you do and yourself and wine.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It's really fun. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for putting the suit on. I appreciate it, that suit.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Like I said, I'll send out an email about next week about Oyster River. And then I think the week after Oyster River, I'm going to do Portugal, because I've direct imported a bunch of crazy things from Portugal, and I'm really excited about that. Hopefully they'll be here in plenty of time. So if you're interested, RSVP for those. And thank you very, very, very much. I will see you all later. Oh, and this is going to get uploaded to YouTube. So if you want to watch it again, or tell your friends, tell other people in restaurants that I'm doing this, that would be awesome, because I want to do more of it. Thanks.
Great.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
y'all later.
Bye, thank you.